30 years she's been scrubbing floors. She was humiliated, ignored, discussed behind her back. Until one day she stepped up to the microphone and showed who really owned the city. Subscribe, write where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to share. Broxton, Georgia, was the kind of town where nothing really changed unless it was falling apart. Time didn't pass there. It settled. The sun always hung low like it was tired of shining, and the streets, once paved with promises of development, now cracked under the weight of rusted trucks and the quiet resentment of the people who drove them. Paint peeled from the signs of old businesses that no longer served customers, only memories. Dust didn't just cling to windows and door frames, it lived there, like a tenant no one could evict. Martha Grace walked those streets every morning before sunrise, her worn white sneakers scuffing the pavement, her mop bucket rattling behind her like a faithful but beaten dog. No one ever greeted her, no one ever waved. And if they did look at her, it was the way you looked at an old lamppost, useless in the daylight, just there. She had a face the town had memorized without ever learning, lines carved by time and silence, skin dark and warm like old earth, eyes the color of coffee left out too long. Her back was slightly hunched from decades of lifting what wasn't hers to carry. She was the cleaning lady. The one who swept crumbs off diner booths, wiped ketchup stains off the tables without a thank you, and disappeared before her shadow dared to fall too far onto any sidewalk of significance. At Sandy's Diner, she was already halfway through her routine when the first man walked in. Dale Hardwick, mid-50s, belly round from beer and bad habits, greeted the cook with a slap on the back and muttered to no one in particular, "You'd think someone would teach her how to move faster." Martha heard. She always heard. But she never looked up. Her mop moved in slow, steady strokes. Clean water dipped into dirty. Her hands, brown and veined like roots, didn't flinch. "Watch it, Martha," another voice snickered. "Don't want you slipping on your own work." The laughter that followed was the casual kind, the kind that didn't wait for permission because it didn't think it needed any. By 8 a.m., she had already cleaned the diner, the lobby of the community center, and the back hallway of the county records office. At each place, she was invisible until she got in someone's way, and then she was too visible. Too much. "You're blocking the file cabinet. You missed a corner. You can't use that sink. You people always leave water everywhere." It never mattered how much she cleaned. It never mattered that she had worked in that same building for over 2 decades. Later that morning, she arrived at the Whitman estate, a colonial mansion perched on the North Hill like it owned the horizon. The Whitmans were old money, old politics, old everything. Mrs. Evelyn Whitman was the self-appointed queen of Broxton society. Her voice, sharp as a sewing pin, pierced through the grand foyer the moment Martha walked in. "You're late," Evelyn said, though Martha was 10 minutes early. "The sitting room's a mess. And mind the carpet, I had it cleaned just last week." Martha said nothing. She never did. She simply nodded, placed her bucket in the corner, and set about her work. The sitting room was immaculate, but she cleaned it anyway. She always did. Mrs. Whitman continued talking, not to Martha but around her, as if the air itself might absorb her commentary. "I swear, these contractors nowadays are worse than useless. I had to threaten a lawsuit just to get them to finish the gazebo. And have you heard about the lots being sold on Birch Lane? Word is, someone from Atlanta is buying them up. No one knows who. Can you imagine the sort of people that'll bring in? Not our kind." Her words dangled in the air like poison, light but lethal. Martha dusted the shelves slowly, deliberately, her back turned. At one point, Evelyn gestured with her teacup toward the fireplace and said, "And while you're at it, wipe that baseboard. You missed it last week. I expect thoroughness, Martha. I can't have guests thinking I hired just anyone." The word "just" hung there, weighted, dagger-shaped. Martha knelt, cloth in hand, and wiped. By sunset, she'd cleaned 4 homes, the staff kitchen at the town's small hospital, and the hallway leading to the mayor's office. Her last stop was always the same: her own front porch, where the mail was stuffed in the box by someone who never bothered to close the lid. Her house was small, painted pale blue long ago, but the paint had faded into a weary gray. It stood at the edge of Broxton, where the paved roads gave way to gravel and grass didn't grow in straight lines. Inside, everything was spotless. Her table had 1 chair. Her bed was always made. The kitchen had no clutter. Only 1 picture hung on the wall. It was a photo of a boy, 16, maybe 17, with a wide smile and a head full of dreams. His name was James, and he was dead. On the mantel, beside the photo, sat a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed now, but not from age, from handling. She had unfolded and refolded it so many times the creases were nearly torn through. It read, "Local teen dies in police custody, authorities investigating." There had never been an update, no arrests, no justice, just silence. Martha went to the basement. It was colder there, quieter in a different way. Against one wall stood a row of filing cabinets. Against another, 2 large monitors glowed softly in the dark. A long work table held ledgers, contracts, sealed envelopes, and a locked briefcase. She turned on the light. The basement revealed another version of Martha, one no one in Broxton had ever seen. On one screen, the day's stock report. Gold was rising. On the other, emails from legal teams, engineers, mine managers across Nevada, Colorado, Ghana. One new message blinked. Final approval for Broxton build-out. Construction begins in 2 weeks pending local permits. GH. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder labeled Gray Minerals, LLC. Inside, articles of incorporation, ownership certificates, corporate resolutions, all signed under the name Margaret H. Green, her alias, her armor. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. The hum of the server filled the room. Upstairs, Broxton went on thinking Martha Grace was nobody, that she had nothing. But down here, the truth pulsed with light and power. She didn't own just stock. She owned land. She owned contracts. She owned decisions. And soon, she would own the moment. As she rose from the chair, she looked once more at the screen with the blueprint of Broxton's downtown overlay. She touched the corner of the map where Sandy's Diner stood, then Birch Lane, then the courthouse. Every piece had been bought through silent hands. Every document prepared under careful names. 30 years of work. 30 years of being small enough for them to ignore. She didn't need their permission anymore. She had built an empire in the silence they gave her. Martha turned off the lights, climbed the stairs, locked the door behind her. The next morning, she would wake before dawn again. She would clean their floors, polish their windows, and bow her head when they shouted. But not for long, not much longer now. It began with whispers, the kind that didn't come from mouths, but from mailboxes and cash registers, from quick glances over shoulders and half-finished sentences. Someone was buying up Birch Lane. Not just one lot, all of them. Within 2 weeks, the town council of Broxton had convened a series of emergency meetings. The mayor, Charles Harlan, sat red-faced in his corduroy chair beneath the faded seal of the county. A balding man with a fondness for whiskey and ceremony, He opened each meeting with a gavel strike as if trying to shatter the rumors that grew like ivy through the cracks in the walls. "Let's get to the bottom of this nonsense," he barked during the first session. "We need names. Who's purchasing the properties? We're not turning Birch Lane into some free-for-all." What he meant was clear. Broxton had always kept certain parts of town separate. The unspoken boundaries, who could live where, who could walk into which store without stairs, had existed longer than the roads that cut the town in half. Birch Lane was the border, the neutral ground between them and us. If someone was buying it all, that meant someone was changing the rules. And Broxton didn't like change. Martha had cleaned the floors of the mayor's office so many times she could navigate it blind. That morning, as she moved her mop across the marble tiles, she could hear the muffled sound of the council's deliberations behind the heavy oak door. She wasn't supposed to be there while they met, but the assistant had forgotten to warn her. She didn't leave. She kept mopping. "We have no buyer on file," someone said. "The LLC is registered in Delaware, Classic Vale, no listed directors." Another voice. "Heard from Carol down at the bank. The funding's real, millions, and not just local investors. This is out-of-town money." Then a third, deeper voice. "You know what this means, don't you? If we don't act, this town will be run by people who don't care about Broxton. Outsiders, maybe even—" A pause. Then someone cleared their throat. "Maybe even people with an agenda." Martha paused only briefly. She squeezed her mop head, dipped it back into the bucket, and moved silently to the hallway. By the time the door opened and the mayor's assistant emerged, she was already in the lobby, adjusting the mop handle, her head down. The assistant blinked. "You're still here?" Martha nodded once. "Well, finish up and go out the side. Don't want the council to trip over a mop, now do we?" She left without a word. Outside, the sun pressed down like judgment. The grocery store buzzed with more than heat. In the checkout line, Missy Clark gossiped with another customer over a loaf of Wonder Bread and a pack of menthols. "I heard they're going to build a mall. Imagine that, a mall here. Next thing you know, we'll have gangs." "Or government housing," the other woman said, whispering the words like a slur. "They say it's a black developer," Missy added. "One of those equity groups that use all that diversity talk to hide what they really mean." Martha stood 2 aisles away, her basket holding only oatmeal and a jar of instant coffee. She heard it all. She always did. The register beeped, the floor creaked, the cashier barely looked at her. When she returned home, she found a letter waiting on the porch. Thick envelope. Atlanta postmark. Inside, the final deeds. The last plot on Birch Lane had closed. Her company now owned all of it. The time had come. The memory of James came uninvited that night. He was 16 again. Skinny, bright-eyed, wearing a faded Lakers jersey too big for his shoulders. She remembered the way he used to run, arms flailing, legs too long for his body, laughing at the wind like it was his friend. He had dreams. He wanted to be a teacher, or maybe a writer. He wasn't sure. The day he died was like any other. He had gone to the corner store to buy a soda. Someone had robbed the place earlier, and the clerk panicked when he saw James reaching into his hoodie pocket for cash. The police were called. They didn't ask questions. They threw him to the ground, crushed his ribs, shattered his teeth. He died in the back of the cruiser before they made it to the station. They called it a misunderstanding, a technical error. He was buried in a cheap suit, and the police chief sent a letter, typed, unsigned. There would be no charges, no press conference, just condolences. Martha had screamed once. a long, endless sound that ripped her lungs apart. Then she stopped screaming. She didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't cry when the lawyer told her there was nothing they could do. Instead, she sold her house, bought a mining claim from a man in Nevada who thought she was crazy. "There's nothing out there but rock and coyotes," he said. She nodded. "Then I'll teach the rock to listen." She hired a contractor, then an accountant, then a second mining engineer who didn't ask questions. Everything registered under aliases. Margaret H. Green. Gray Holdings. She studied business at night, geology on the weekends, learned everything they didn't want her to know. No one in Broxton noticed. She came back a year later, resumed her old jobs. Fell on hard times, they whispered. Shame. No one asked what she had been doing. No one cared. They never looked at her. Not really. And that was her greatest weapon. The next morning, at the Whitman estate, Evelyn Whitman was in rare form. She sipped tea from a porcelain cup, her eyes gleaming with superiority. "You wouldn't believe the nerve of some people," she said, waving her hand in the air like she was swatting flies. "Selling their property to some mystery buyer. It's ruining the character of this town." Martha was scrubbing the tile around the fireplace. The baseboard had already been cleaned twice, but Evelyn pointed at it anyway. "Missed a spot," she said. "Again." Martha stood slowly, wiped her hands, and leaned her mop against the wall. "I heard," Evelyn continued, "that it might be some kind of black equity fund. You know how they do. They say it's about inclusion, but it's always about takeover. Entitlement dressed up in suits." She laughed and sipped her tea. Martha met her gaze for a second. Not long, just enough. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "What?" Martha turned back to her mop. "Nothing, ma'am." "Well," Evelyn huffed, "don't just stand there." When she was gone, Martha ran her fingers over the edge of the fireplace. The same edge her son used to lean against before dinner. She had worked in this house when James was still alive. She had dusted the same bookshelves, swept the same marble floor. Nothing had changed, except her. That night, she stood in her basement with a map of the town pinned to the wall. Colored pins marked every property her holding company had acquired. Birch Lane, the old post office, the train station, even the lot behind the elementary school. She opened a file labeled Strategic Reclamation Phase 1. The plan was already in motion, but first she needed to deliver a message, not just through land deeds or quiet legal filings. This time, they would hear her speak. The mayor's office announced the town hall meeting for Thursday. An opportunity to hear from the developer behind the Birch Lane project, the flyer read. All citizens welcome. Speculation exploded. The local paper ran a story titled, "Who Owns Birch Lane? The Town Deserves Answers." Some guessed it was a liberal university. Others said it was a scam. A few feared it was a tech company or a criminal syndicate. No one guessed the truth. No one looked at Martha Grace. No one ever had. The law firm stood tall in Midtown Atlanta, all glass and angles, its polished entrance reflecting a world far removed from Broxton's dusty roads and sun-faded storefronts. The firm's name, Teller, Wren and Associates, shimmered in etched silver across the entrance, the kind of place where deals worth millions were signed in rooms sealed by silence and confidentiality. Martha Grace stood on the curb, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder and her Sunday shoes pinching her toes. She wore a navy coat too warm for the day, its hem faded and one button missing, and a plain brown scarf that had once belonged to her mother. People walked past her without a second glance. A few glanced over, hesitated, then kept walking. At the front desk, the receptionist's smile faltered for a second when she saw her. "Ma'am, this is a private building." "I have an appointment," Martha said softly. She slid a card across the marble surface. The woman blinked. "Oh, one moment." She tapped her headset, frowned, then quickly straightened. "Mr. Brown will meet you personally. He's on his way down." Less than a minute later, a tall man in a tailored navy suit rounded the corner. His posture shifted when he saw her, not out of surprise, but recognition. Deep, professional respect. "Martha," he said, offering his hand, "it's good to see you. Let's go upstairs. We've got everything ready." She nodded once, didn't smile, didn't shake his hand. He understood. They'd worked together for nearly 20 years after all. He had been there since the beginning, when she first filed the articles of incorporation, when she structured the layers of shell companies, when she bought the land under assumed names, when she signed every paper with a calm hand and a memory full of injustice. On the 37th floor, they walked past a row of polished conference rooms into a smaller, windowless office with 2 leather chairs and a walnut desk. "The final contract for Broxton is here," he said. "Gray Holdings has full ownership of all parcels on Birch Lane. The permits for construction are pre-approved through state partnerships. All we need is your final sign-off on the social infrastructure allocation and transfer of community zone and authority." Martha didn't ask him to explain. She understood every word. She had studied municipal code between night shifts. She had hired experts and read every line they wrote. She knew what it meant to be ignored by power and how to wield it silently. She reviewed the documents slowly, methodically. She adjusted the language on Section 14, ensuring a permanent education grant was carved from profit margins, not leftover budgets. She added 2 clauses under environmental oversight. She scratched out one line that allowed for future expansion of private development. She didn't build this empire to make someone else richer. She built it for justice. She signed her alias, Margaret H. Green, in smooth cursive. "You sure you don't want the press to know who you are?" Mr. Brown asked. "I'm not here for headlines," Martha said. "I'm here to be heard." He nodded. "Then it's time." Broxton's town hall had not seen this many people since the Centennial Parade in 1986. Cars filled every parking space along Main Street. Folding chairs spilled out onto the lawn. Even teenagers who normally avoided town meetings loitered by the windows, their curiosity piqued by gossip and spectacle. A makeshift podium stood beneath the rusted town seal. Mayor Charles Harlan paced nervously nearby, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that had grown damp hours ago. Reporters from the Broxton Gazette, and even one from a small Atlanta affiliate, hovered with notepads and cameras. "The investor should be here any minute," the mayor mumbled to his assistant, who had no updates. "I heard he's bringing lawyers," someone whispered. "Big ones, maybe even security." "They say he's gonna bulldoze the whole street," another said. "That can't be legal. They're gonna build a center for ex-cons. That's what I heard." Someone laughed. "Wouldn't surprise me. Let 'em take Birch Lane. We'll see how fast property values drop." At precisely 6 p.m., the meeting began. Mayor Harlan stepped up to the microphone, trying to sound composed. "Citizens of Broxton, thank you for coming. We're here today to meet the lead investor in the Birch Lane development, an individual or group, rather, who now owns a significant portion of downtown. We've invited this party here in good faith to answer your questions and address your concerns." He glanced to the side, and then he froze. Martha Grace stepped up to the podium. She was dressed simply. A dark green blouse, black slacks, the same old shoes, her scarf tucked neatly around her neck. She carried no notes, no fanfare, just a folder. For a moment, the entire town forgot how to breathe. Some people chuckled nervously. "Is this a joke?" a man muttered. "Where's the real developer?" "Get her out of the way," someone else said, standing to object. Martha said nothing. She opened the folder, laid out the documents on the podium. Contracts, ownership transfers, zoning approvals, banking letters, all notarized, all legally binding. Then she looked up and met their eyes. "My name is Martha Grace," she said, her voice firm. "You've known me as your cleaner, the one who mops your floors, scrubs your toilets, wipes the baseboards no one else sees. For 30 years, I've served this town in silence, while you spoke about me, around me, at me, but never to me." She let the silence settle, heavy and hot. "For 30 years, I've watched how you treat people like me, people who don't wear the right shoes, who don't live on the right street, who don't sound like you or look like you. I've watched your smiles fade when I walk into a room. I've watched your pity turn to disdain the moment I dare stand upright." The mayor opened his mouth, but her gaze pinned him where he stood. "While you were laughing," she said, "I was building. While you were whispering, I was buying. You didn't notice because you didn't think I was capable, because you were never taught to see dignity in the hands of someone holding a mop." She paused. "Now I own Birch Lane, all of it, every inch, every cracked sidewalk, every rusted hydrant, every shuttered storefront you forgot about." A man near the back stood. "You're trying to embarrass us." "No," Martha said calmly. "I'm trying to wake you up." Someone shouted, "Is this revenge?" She shook her head. "If I wanted revenge, I would have raised your rents, bulldozed your businesses, and left you with nothing. I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want fairness. I want the next black girl who walks into Sandy's diner to be treated like a customer, not a mistake." The crowd murmured, not angry, not yet, but shaken. "You will not stop this project," she continued, "because the contracts are ironclad, the permits are sealed, the buildings will rise whether you like it or not. But what you still have, what you can still choose, is whether you want to be part of something better, or stay locked in something broken." She stepped away from the podium, laid the folder in front of the mayor. "Everything's legal," she said, "but it's also moral. For once, this town will belong to everyone." Then she turned and walked off the stage. Some people clapped, not many, but enough. That night, in her kitchen, Martha sat at the table with a cup of weak tea and no lights on. She stared at the photo of James and whispered, "They saw me today." Outside, someone placed flowers on her porch. No card. Across town, the mayor reviewed the contracts and realized there was nothing he could do. At the Whitman estate, Evelyn poured a glass of wine with shaken hands. And at the law firm in Atlanta, Mr. Brown raised a toast to a client whose name he would never leak to the press. For the first time in decades, Broxton didn't know how to look away from Martha Grace. Because now they finally saw her, and she had never been more visible. The next morning, Broxton buzzed like a kicked beehive. Everyone had an opinion, and most were unprepared to hear their own silence mirrored back at them the way Martha Grace had done. Her words rang louder than the church bell, heavier than the train that cut through the valley every evening. They rang in the heads of people who had never once said her name aloud, unless they were asking for a rag or reminding her to get the baseboards. At the diner, Dale Hardwick stirred his coffee without drinking it. "She's not really going to build all that, is she?" he muttered. Across from him, Larry Boone shook his head. She's bluffing. Can't see a woman like that running a damn thing. Probably just a puppet for someone else. Don't matter who's holding the pen if she owns the paper, said a voice behind them. It was the cook, Martin, a quiet man who'd kept his head down for years. Now he wiped his hands and looked Dale in the eye. Y'all just didn't see her coming. No one replied because it was true. That day, Martha did not go to work. She stayed in her small house, her phone ringing endlessly with reporters, lawyers, and old acquaintances pretending to remember her birthday. She answered none of them. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, sorting through blueprints, schedules, and hiring recommendations. She circled names of contractors who paid their workers fair wages. She crossed out firms that had discrimination lawsuits. She made calls to community organizations in Atlanta and Montgomery, inviting them to set up satellite offices in the new community center. She was not building a mall. She was building a future. By the end of the week, construction began, quietly, efficiently. A handful of men and women arrived with machines and permits, cleared the lots along Birch Lane, and placed signs where the first beams would rise. The signs read, "Coming soon, the James Grace Community Center. Health, education, dignity." On the corner where a pawn shop once stood, another banner fluttered, "Broxton, legal aid, free counsel for all residents funded by Gray Holdings." A third sign outside the lot near the old post office, "Martha's Library, because we were never illiterate, just ignored." At first, people called it performative, a stunt. "She's just trying to embarrass us," Evelyn Whitman told the newspaper. "Mark my words, she'll run out of money." But the money didn't run out. More crews arrived. The foundation for the school was laid. A local cafe announced it would reopen next to the library. Young black teachers from nearby cities applied for residencies, drawn to the vision outlined on Gray Holdings' website. It became clear. This was not a phase or an empty power play. This was permanence. At the town council meeting the following Monday, Mayor Harlan read a prepared statement through gritted teeth. "We welcome economic development in Broxton and hope to collaborate with all stakeholders to ensure a prosperous, unified community." Behind the diplomatic words, he was boiling. He had reviewed the contracts a dozen times. Everything was legal, watertight. He had no power to revoke a single permit. After the meeting, he tried to call Martha. She didn't answer, so he drove to her house. He stood on her porch in his pressed shirt and Sunday tie, knocking once, then again. She opened the door halfway. "Miss Grace," he began, "I think we should talk." She looked at him without blinking. "I think we've talked enough, Mr. Mayor," she said, then shut the door with a click softer than thunder, but louder than judgment. Evelyn Whitman arrived 2 days later. No chauffeur this time. She drove herself in her pristine white Cadillac and clutched a bouquet of lilies wrapped in glossy paper. On Martha's doorstep, she stood with her spine stiff and her pride wrapped around her throat like pearls. "I came to say," Evelyn said when the door opened, "that I may have misjudged you." Martha stared at the flowers. "I don't want apologies," she said. "I want reflection. Reflection is heavier. It takes longer. You can keep the flowers." She closed the door again. Evelyn left them on the porch. The sun wilted them by dusk. That evening, Martha walked the streets of Broxton alone. The sidewalks were quiet. A few children rode bikes past the diner. A man swept his porch. No one stopped her. But no one turned away either. For the first time, they were watching her not as a shadow, but as a force. She walked to the mural near the community center's side. It was nearly finished. painted by a local black artist who'd driven down from Atlanta when she heard the story. The mural showed a young boy with a notebook in one hand and a key in the other. Behind him, open doors. Around him, broken chains forming bridges. Above him, in bold white letters, "For those who were never heard, now you speak in brick and steel." Underneath, in gold, in memory of James Emmanuel Grace, 1977-1993. Martha sat on a bench across the street, letting the mural soak into her vision, breathing it like air. Her son had never been given a platform. Now he was the foundation. In the weeks that followed, the town changed. Not by magic, not overnight, but undeniably. The school district applied for grants. The local library requested new books. Black residents who had long left Broxton for better places began returning to visit, curious to see if the old place had grown a new spine. At the gas station, the clerk, who used to ignore Martha, now offered her a receipt before she asked. At the grocery store, a young mother nudged her daughter to say thank you when Martha held the door open. It wasn't redemption, but it was movement, and sometimes that was enough. On the 6-month anniversary of the town hall meeting, the James Grace Community Center opened its doors. A crowd gathered. No fanfare, no politicians, just families, children, teachers, advocates. Martha stood in the back. When they asked her to speak, she declined. Let them speak now, she thought. Let the town write a new language. But later that evening, she returned alone. She walked the halls of the center she had willed into existence. In one room, children were drawing. In another, a volunteer was explaining how to file housing complaints. In the gym, a high school basketball team practiced beneath a scoreboard that read, "Grace, Dignity, Power." In the main corridor, there was a small plaque, built by the woman who cleaned our floors until she cleaned our souls. Martha touched it briefly, then moved on. At home, she brewed tea and sat with the silence. The photo of James remained on the mantel, now joined by a second photo, the mural. She spoke aloud for the first time in days. "We're not ghosts anymore," she said. Then she turned off the lights, and in the quiet that followed, Broxton breathed a new name into its bones, not with shame, but with the kind of reverence that comes from knowing you were wrong and deciding to be better. The town had never known Martha Grace. Now it never would forget her. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives. Watch the next video to explore another story that challenges everything you thought you knew. And if this message deserves to be heard, share this video with someone who needs it.